Please welcome Linda Lopes.
Thank you,
Have a
Jeff.
good time.
Thank you so much. My goodness, I didn't think I'd be talking to so many people. Well, I am Linda Lopes, Rosedal. Thank you all for coming. The house that you see is the house that my family has owned since 1943, and I'll tell you all about it. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to start with the owner history of the house. The Queen Anne Victorian was built in 1890 by Bernardo Fernandez. Among his many hats, he built several houses in San Francisco, Martinez, and Pinole, this being one of them. He sold the house to Henry Taylor in 1899 for 10 gold pieces. Keep Henry Taylor's name in mind. He shows up later on in my presentation. When Henry Taylor passed away in 1914, he left the house to his niece, Sarah Alvarez, and her husband, Charlie. That's my house, and behind it is the carriage house, and there's a water tower. The water tower is gone. Sorry. Sterling Kelly told me this great story about Charlie Alvarez. He liked to garden in the patch of land where my lemon tree is today, but he would get awfully thirsty in that hot summer sun. Sarah would come out and check on Charlie every hour or so and make sure he was okay. But what Sarah didn't know is that after she came out to check on him, he'd stroll down to the Antlers Tavern, have a little drink, and then sneak back to the garden before Sarah came out again. After Sarah passed away in 1943, the house and the empty lot to the left were put into her estate and handled by the Mechanics Bank. Now let's go back in time to my grandfather, Antone Azevedo Lopes. He was born in Portugal in 1880 and came to Pinole when he was 26 years old in 1906. He was the only one in his family who came to America. He did have several friends that lived in Pinole at the time. When I asked my dad why Grandpa came all the way across the United States after landing in Ellis Island, Dad said Grandpa was told the streets in California were lined with gold. He worked as the gardener for the Downer Mansion, the mansion in 1905, and lived on the property. He and Ed Downer Sr., that's the current mansion, I'm sure you know, he and Ed Downer Sr. became very good friends. As you probably know, Ed Downer began the Mechanics Bank in Pinole. While working for the Downers, my grandfather met my grandmother, Rosalina Soto. They were married on July 19th, 1915, and lived in the basement at 678 Quinan Street. After my dad was born in 1917, they rented property from Bernardo Fernandez in Pinole Valley, where Grandpa worked a tomato farm. Grandpa worked very hard on the ranch, raising tomatoes, and sold them to Heinz. After harvest, they would load up their horses and wagon and take the tomatoes to the Berkeley plant for processing. Grandma worked just as hard on the ranch, killing chickens for supper, baking bread, and churning butter, tending her garden, doing the laundry by hand, and taking care of a baby all at the same time. There were times she had to cook 3 large meals for all the ranch hands. Work never stopped. I enjoyed saying to Pop, "Man works from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done." He would always agree with me, knowing how hard Grandma worked. I have the country kitchen table Grandma served her meals on in my kitchen, and I wish it could talk. In 1939, my grandparents left the ranch and bought a feed and fuel store at the bottom of Tank Farm Hill in San Pablo. The beautiful roll-top desk from the store sits in my guest room. They retired in 1943 and wanted to move back to Pinole. That's when Ed Downer Jr. encouraged my grandparents to bid on the Alvarez estate, which consisted of a 2-story Queen Anne cottage and the empty lot next door. They won the bid for the house and the empty lot for $2,500. My father, Tony Lopes, I love this picture, was born 6 houses up the street at 644 Quinan Street by a midwife on February 8, 1917. My grandmother, Rosalina, passed away in 1951. This is a picture of my grandmother, my grandfather, and her sister, Eva. Let's see. After Grandma passed away, Grandpa lived with us. My grandfather passed away in 1957. Between 1951 and 1977, my parents rented the house on Quinan Street to several people. My grandparents gave the empty lot next door to my parents for their wedding gift, for all the work that Dad did on the ranch without getting paid. Mom and Dad met in 1938 and were married on November 4th. When Dad returned from the Army, after the war, Dad got a job at Mare Island, and he would come home and work on their house while living with my grandparents in the house next door. They moved into their new home on July 26th, 1 month before my sister Patty was born. I was born in March of 1950. My parents lived at 612 Quinan Street for 57 years before moving to Pinole Senior Village the last few years of their lives. For as long as my grandparents owned the house address was 616 Quinan Street, but that didn't make any sense to me. If my house is 616 and my parents was 612 and the house next to them was 632, it was numbered all wrong. And the pizza dude had a terrible time trying to find us. I did a historical search in 2001 and discovered the 0 had been transposed to a 6 during the D transfer. It took months to correct, but I'm sure you're happy to hear the pizza dude can find us now. One of the couples that rented the house, this is a treasure. One of the couples that rented the house for Mom and Dad was Harold and Celeste Silvas, which is Stella Faria's sister. They became the very best of friends. Our two families traveled on vacations to Disneyland, played in the snow, and spent every Christmas Eve together. Mom and Dad, Harold and Celeste, went to Reno twice a year without exception to celebrate their anniversaries. Dad and Harold's arguments between Fords and Buicks are classic. I love them all dearly. Mom was pregnant with Patty when Celeste was pregnant with Chris. Then Celeste was pregnant with Cindy when my mom was pregnant with me. Chris and I were born in March, and Patty and Cindy were born in August. We have remained BFFs for over 70 years, and our friendship, from the friendship that our parents created, and still get together every March and August to celebrate our birthdays. The last couple Mom and Dad rented to were an adorable couple from Holland we called Oma and Opa. They lived in the house from 1959 till March of 1977. In 77, my husband Rosie was in the Navy, and we were stationed in Beeville, Texas. If you're ever into Texas, you understand Beeville is not fun. By the time my daughter Amy was 2, I was pregnant with my daughter Heidi. Rosie decided he wanted to get out of the Navy and live in California. He was from South Dakota, and he didn't want to shovel snow anymore. I called Mom in March, and I told her of our plans. I remember her saying, "Wouldn't it be nice if you could live next door?" I responded with, "Mom, Oma and Opa are never going to leave." 4 days later, they gave notice. Thank you, Jesus. They were in their 80s, and the stairs were getting too hard to climb. So Rosie, Amy, and a very pregnant me moved into the house in May of 1977. My daughter Heidi was born in September of that year, and in November of 78, my husband left us to go back to South Dakota. I guess he decided he did want to shovel snow. I became a single mom of a 2- and a 4-year-old, and like they say, it takes a village. I feel so blessed that I had this house next door to my parents. They were wonderful. In 2003, my parents put the house in my name. For some reason, Jeff thought this was a great picture. I remodeled the kitchen and added a 14-foot deck out the back. When my grandparents bought the house in 1943, it had a dirt floor in the basement. Grandpa raised the house and had a cement floor poured. Unfortunately, there were no city codes in place for how high the ceiling needed to be, so Grandpa only raised it 7 feet instead of the 8 feet that's needed today if I wanted to add an apartment downstairs. The basement is a great storage for all my holiday decorations and for the occasional, "Mom, can we store something in the basement?" The picture that you see here was painted by a gentleman named Manuel, who helped my grandfather repair the back porch when they moved in. It was painted freehand and had been there since 1943. I would love to find someone, if you know of anyone, who can help me preserve it and since the paint is peeling. Mr. Fernandez needed a carriage house for his horse and carriage. When you look at the barn, you'll notice one door is larger than the other, one side for the horse and one side for the carriage. Dad always used the carriage house, or barn as we called it, for his workshop. With 3 women in the house, the man needed a man cave. It may be the very first man cave ever in California. When I was 16, I went to visit Dad in the barn, and I remember saying, "You know, Dad, this would make a really cute cottage." He looked at me and smiled and said, "Over my dead body." We both laughed, knowing it was his getaway, and he would never give it up. I have wonderful memories of spending time with Dad in the barn. He taught me how to use tools, and we solved most of the world's problems there. Between 1922 and 1930, Dad attended a one-room schoolhouse in Pinole Valley. He may have only had an 8th grade education, but there wasn't anything he couldn't build or fix, and it was all done in the barn. What he didn't know, he would go to the library and read up on how to. Remember, there was no YouTube or Google back then. When asked why we didn't have an automatic dishwasher, Pop would smile and say, "I don't need one, I have 2," referring to my sister and I. He did the same with the garage door. We'd have to get out of the car and open it even in the pouring rain. Later, when Patty and I left the house, Mom got a dishwasher and an electric door opener. He built an outboard boat in the barn in 1958. He named the Paddle-In. We spent many Saturdays at Lake Berryessa in the summers learning to water ski and fish, especially with the Silvases. One year I asked him to build desks for my daughters. He built 4 for his 4 granddaughters. I asked for a dollhouse for my girls for Christmas. He built 2, one for my girls and one for my daughters. He adored his grandchildren. He built toy boxes for his great-grandchildren, Becca and William. I always thought it was sad that Pop didn't have boys to teach his wonderful skills, but he never wanted for chocolate chip cookies or an apple pie. I learned common sense from my parents and to be an honest person, how to balance a checkbook and how to save money. Mom and Dad always said, never take anything that doesn't belong to you. Be courteous to everyone. Take pride in what you do. If you fail, try again. You learn by your mistakes. And always pay your debts. My childhood was very happy. We were a typical 50s family. Mom and Dad were born and raised Catholic, Mom more so than Dad. In fact, Mom worked for many years in the church office. Without fail, she would get a call at Christmas time asking her, "What time is midnight mass?" Patty and I were baptized at St. Joseph's, received our first communion, confirmation, and got married there. Mom and Dad set a good example by taking us to church every Sunday, but I don't think Dad's heart was in it, but he did it for us. One beautiful Sunday morning when I was 16, I decided to go to church by myself. As I sat there waiting for the service to begin, I thought, I don't want to be here right now. I left the church and walked down to the bay. I decided then and there, even God, who had created this glorious day, wasn't sitting in church. When I got home, I proclaimed, "I'm not going back to Mass. Dad, you're off the hook." I can't tell you how happy the man was. Mom passed away on July 30th, 2005 at 89, and Dad passed away on April 1st, 3 years later at 91. Patty's family inherited the home at 612 Quinan Street, and I received my grandparents' home. Both, let's see. I waited 6 years after Dad passed to convert the barn into a 320-foot square cottage. I've had two wonderful tenants, both Dan and Tim, who have rented from me. Lopes Lane and Lopes Court, both are named after my family. I lived at 612 Quinan Street till 1972. Moved to Oakland for 2 years and then got married. After that, my husband was stationed in Imperial Beach in Southern California for 2 years, and then Beeville, Texas for 2 years. I have given tours of my home many times. At 129 years old, it still looks great. It has 10-foot ceilings, pocket doors between the parlor and dining room, and the fireplace is solid oak, which had 4 coats of paint until I stripped it off a couple years after I moved in. My theory is back in the 40s, Sherwin-Williams' motto was, cover the earth, and they did. They covered everything. When I moved in, we scraped a little corner of the fireplace, and I said, oh my God, there's oak under here. 4 coats of paint, and I stripped every one of them off because I couldn't stand it. The china cabinet can be accessed either in the kitchen or the living room because when the house was built, today's living room was actually the dining room. The fireplace was built to service the kitchen and dining room. The chimney was built like an upside-down Y so the heat could go into both rooms. The one in the kitchen was closed off many years ago, and I've had to stop using the fireplace in the living room due to falling bricks. It has 2 bedrooms with a Dick and Jane bathroom between the bedrooms. Remember, when the house was built in 1890, there was no indoor plumbing. So the bathroom was added later. When my girls and I had to get ready for a function, 1 bedroom was quite a challenge with 3 women in the house. We had to have a shower schedule. Okay, Amy, you have from 9 to 9:30, Heidi 9:45 to 10:15, and I was usually last. Hair and makeup had to be done in our bedrooms. I'm sure the women in the audience will understand. I have given many tea parties to the Red Hat Society and friends. They love hearing about the history of my family and the house. Now back to Henry Taylor. According to a couple of ladies, his spirit resided in the house until about 8 years ago. He told my friend, who is a psychic, that this was his house and he wasn't leaving. He said he was protecting me and my girls. I had no indication Henry was in the house except twice when I had meetings in my living room, arguments broke out. In 2007, I was giving a tour of my home to several women from the Pinole Police Department. One of the ladies, who I'd never met before, stopped me on her way out and asked me if I knew that there was a spirit in my house. I laughed and told her I had heard about him but never saw any indication of him being there. She said she was sensitive to these things and just wanted to let me know he did not like strangers in his house, which reminded me of the arguments that took place in the living room. My psychic friend encouraged him to go towards the light, and she assured me, Henry has left the building. Mom was very active in Pinole as the secretary of St. Joseph's. She was named Woman of the Year by the Pinole Chamber of Commerce. Not too many people know that the bells you hear from St. Joseph's Church Tower were installed by my dad. Several years later, my sister was also named Woman of the Year, and both she and her husband, David Clark, were honored for starting the Pinole Community Theater. We were a very active family in the theater and still are today. Dad set up the sound system for each production of St. Joseph's Players. Mom, Patty, and I were on stage singing and dancing. After her divorce to Pete Norgard, Patty met and married David Clark, who was the drama teacher at the Pinole Valley High School for over 30 years. Patty and Dave, along with Gary and Nancy Gill, started the Pinole Community Theater and have been going strong for over 34 years. Patty produces the shows. Her daughter, Angie, is a choreographer, and both Angie and Stacy run the Pinole Young Actors Theater. Patty and Angie own and operate Angie's Dance Etc. on Tennant Avenue. Dave passed away a year ago in May, and the new high school is going to be dedicating the theater to Mr. Clark. In February of 1989, after working for the district attorney's office in Richmond for 5 years, I was again blessed. I got a job at the Pinole Police Department. Great commute, right? I was the statistical analyst and reported crimes to the Department of Justice in Sacramento. Knowing all the officers was great, especially when it came to an officer coming by my office saying, "Do you know what the girls are doing at lunch today?" Oh, so I'd get home and I'd say, "Girls, did you enjoy cutting class and going to the Jack in the Box?" Needless to say, they were not impressed with my job or all the officers that would tell on them. I'd leave the PD announcing, "Chocolate chip cookies will be coming out of the oven at 7 o'clock, and I'd have 4 cop cars parked in front of my house. One time the neighbors called Mom and said, "What's happening in Linda's?" And she goes, "Oh, just chocolate chip cookies." One evening, Amy went down to the basement to get something and forgot to close the garage door. At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on my door. "It's Pinole PD. Danny, what are you doing here?" He said, "Linda, you told us we could come over any time for cookies." I said, "Danny, are you kidding me?" And he said, "Yeah, really, the garage door's open." So having them in my life was just amazing because they were so protective. So here I am at 3 o'clock in the morning having, milk and cookies with one of the officers. So then Miles calls Danny and says, "Where are you?" And he says, "I'm at the substation on Quinan Street." "Tell her I'll be right over." Okay, so at 3 o'clock in the morning now there's 3 of us sitting at the kitchen table eating cookies and drinking milk. Pretty soon they get a call from their sergeant. "Where are you guys?" "We're at the substation on Quinan Street." "Tell her to put the coffee on." So after 8 years at the Pinole Police Department, I transferred to the fire department as the administrative assistant. Any woman's dream job, right? Me and 19 men. But I was the oldest, of course. I was the den mother. After Fire Chief Mike Radcliffe retired, Jim Parrott was my chief. Somehow he never believed the excuses I had for being late for work, since I only lived 2 blocks away. There was an accident on the freeway. Yeah, no, How about the car wouldn't start? No, it worked didn't work. But I worked for the city for 20 years and retired in 2009. So, there's Dad with his harem. Dad surrounded by his 8 women. Mom and Dad had 2 girls. Patty had 2 girls. I had 2 girls. My oldest daughter had 1 girl. Patty's oldest daughter married a gentleman that had 2 girls. Stacy had 2 girls. My daughter Heidi finally had a boy and a little girl. So we have Prince William and Natalie. Everyone in this picture has lived at 610 or 612 Quinan Street at one time or another. I don't know what the future holds, but I'd love to keep the house in our family for years to come. My granddaughter Becca has moved in with me and wants to have the house as she grows older. I heard a quote the other day. "A house remembers everyone who lived in it." My house has lots of family memories. Come on by and I'll give you a tour. Thank you, Jeff, for all your help with this presentation and inviting me to tell my family's story. And thank you all again for coming. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
When you said that bathroom, what kind of bathroom did you have in there?
In between the 2 rooms, they managed to put in a tub and a toilet.
What was that called?
It was a Dick and Jane.
I've never heard that.
Or Jack and Jill. Dick and Jane, Jack and Jill. Yeah.
So it was 2 bathrooms?
So it's 1 bathroom between the 2 bedrooms. Yeah, so you have 2 doors,
Oh,
on
2
each
doors
book.
and then-
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I've never heard that term.
Yeah. It was great. But like I said, with 3 women in the house, oh dear Lord. It was really entertaining to try and get everybody's hair and makeup and, so. Any other questions? Oh, yeah?
Was this house raised or it was always a two-story?
No, it was raised because it had a dirt floor. So my grandfather had it raised and put in a cement floor. Mhm. Yeah,
So it's 2 or 3 stories,
it's just two,
just 2.
yeah. And the bottom is 7 feet. But I have 10-foot ceilings upstairs. Yes,
If we come by, will you have chocolate chip cookies?
absolutely. My friend Tim, anytime he does anything for him, I go, what is it gonna cost me? And he goes, chocolate chip cookies. I always have chocolate chip cookies. Please, come by. Yes.
I don't have a question, but you certainly have enhanced our knowledge.
Oh, good. Well, thank
Very
you.
impressive.
Oh, yes.
Hi Linda,
Hi, how are
I
you?
remember Linda from the PTA Collins School.
Oh, yes.
We went to school together.
Yes.
And she was very active in the PTA and I was like,
Very, yeah. This is like old home week. It's Chris and Cindy and Carol Frisk, Mary, and her sister Susie. If you were a kid in the 50s going to school at Collins School, you were going to school with one of the Fernandeses. Because my sister went to school with Susie, and I went to school with Mary, and then, all the boys someone was going to school with someone, one of them. So.
I just wanted to mention, Quinan Street is a preservation of Old Pinole. And if any newcomers to Pinole have not been down Quinan Street, you should see what Pinole looked like at the turn of the century, because it's the last enclave of beautiful homes and reconstruction and restoration as Pinole once looked. And it's history in the making, and people like Linda here are the ones who have saved it.
Well, other than the 6 years I was gone, I've been on Quinan Street all my life, and I'm 69. So
you attended Knoll Valley.
oh yeah, and the old school on the hill, and then we got shipped down to Walter T. Helms, and then at the time my sister, that's San Pablo, yeah, and then my sister had to go to Richmond, and then they changed the border, and I went to De Anza.
Are any of these houses protected on Quinan Street if we consider it to be?
Historical, only because you can't replace the windows, and I have done that. I put in the double pane windows, because it's just too uncomfortable. Yeah. So, according to the city of Pinole, it's historical, but not to the historical register.
So what building was on this site before Kaiser was built?
Oh, the Fernandez, Faria House, the Faria House. Where they're hoping to open up their museum.
That's a little green one with the fence
Yes,
around it.
yes.
The roses are lovely.
Yes, they are. Yes.
So we went to high school together, and I was just wondering, the pronunciation of your last name, I love the alliteration, Linda Lopes, it just sounds so much.
Thank you.
But then in adulthood later on, I thought, well, is that like an Americanized pronunciation?
It's Portuguese.
Yeah.
It's Portuguese. In fact, I have a great story to tell you. This is so much fun. So in about 1970, I was looking for a job, and I found one at the Ma Bell down in Richmond. And there were several of us females that got hired, and because affirmative action, right, back in the 70s. So about 6 weeks after I'd gotten my job, we're all escorted into this room, and our boss says to us, well, ladies, I just wanted to let you know that because of your Spanish surname, you were all chosen to work here. And I said, really? Because I'm Lopes. I'm Portuguese. And he goes, you didn't misspell your name? And I said, no, it's with an S, not a Z. He had to keep me. So, but affirmative action saved my life. But yeah, Lopes is the pronunciation for the Portuguese. Yeah.
And Lopez is Spanish.
Is Spanish.
Because I've been wondering about that.
Yes, yes, uh-huh. So, yes.
Were you ever in the Holy Ghost parade?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, my God. So was Cindy and Chris and my sister. Yes, we were all in the Holy Ghost. Yeah. We were angels. We carried the rosary, and we had our angel wings at one time. I don't think that was really
Celeste
fair.
was Holy Ghost.
She was the queen. She was queen. Yes, she was. Oh, Diane.
I was Martha Washington and my brother was George Washington.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That makes sense, Carol.
We were the only blonde in
Yeah.
the neighborhood, I think.
Yeah, I remember Fiesta del Pinol. Does anybody remember Fiesta del Pinol? Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. So much fun. But yeah, roller skating. Oh, the big hill at the end of Quinan Street. Anybody seen that big hill? Okay. So one day Patty and I think it's a great idea to go to that big hill and ride our bicycles down the hill. And it was a great idea because at the time, back in the 50s, there was not a stop sign. So we came flying down Quinan Street, and Mom, unfortunately, was standing on the porch. What are you girls doing? You're gonna kill yourself. Oh, okay. So we couldn't do it anymore. But we'd go over and get pollywogs out of the, river. Yeah. Go over to the creek and get the pollywogs, and it was great. Great being in Pinole. Just a typical 50s.
I just thought you might want to talk about where the name Quinan came from.
Well, the gentleman back here probably could tell you more than I could. Why don't you come on up and tell them? Please. See, that's the problem. He was just telling me about Quinan Street.
Okay.
Don't be shy.
Here you go.
I'm Steve Lawton and co-author of the book on Hercules. And so W.R. Quinan was the superintendent of the Hercules Powder Company plant from about 1894 to, I think, about 1899. He subsequently went to South Africa to head up with the Cecil Rhodes gold mining business in South Africa, where he died in about 1905. He was known as, he was not James Brown, but he was known as Mr. Dynamite. Because he actually wrote the book on, he figured out how you manufacture dynamite at sort of industrial quantities, really how to really make it. That book is still today referred to as the official reference text for dynamite makers. So very famous guy. The men at the plant really liked him, enjoyed it. He was a good superintendent. So that was W.R. Quinan, William Russell Quinan.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yes.
What about the... Go ahead.
Did your grandfather or your father ever go back to Portugal?
My dad did. My mom and dad went back to visit and found some relatives, but yeah, Grandpa never went back.
I was curious about the naming of the street, Lopes.
Lopes Lane and Lopes Court?
Yeah,
Mhm.
can you tell?
I know that that's off of Pinion.
Yes.
Yes, that area that they developed and they
How
came up.
did that come about?
I'm not sure who requested it. I know my parents did not, but the city pulled out probably an old name, historical name, and decided that it would be nice to name it after my dad.
I can talk a little bit about
Oh,
that.
great, okay.
Back in the day, it was common for the city council to name streets after former council members or people in the community who were very well known for public service and things of that nature. In fact, George Vincent did a program in this room about a year ago called What's in a Name, And the entire program was about street names in Pinole. For example, Seamus Avenue is named after the Tony Seamus family. They were ranchers out in the valley. Deutsch was a former mayor of Pinole. Stokes, also a politician. So a lot of the street names in Pinole were named after well-known people. Downer Court, the entire Ellerhorst family, Henry Avenue, Alice, Francis, all of those streets are named after the Ellerhorst family. So that's how it came about.
When my mom was probably in her 80s, she learned how to use a computer. She was amazing. She was like so fascinated with it because she loved machines. So she sat down and wrote her biography, which is where a lot of my information came from. I'm blessed to have this. And then she made my father sit down and write his biography. So I have these books too, if you ever want to look at them. It's a wonderful thing to do. I will when I'm gone. Any other questions?
You know, I would like to say that Linda is an amazing woman. And I met her.
Tim, come up.
Huh?
Yeah, sure? I had to do it. Come on.
This is my tenant, my son, Tim Brown.
Hi, everyone. Linda is an amazing woman, and it's something how lemons can make you stumble upon history. And that's how I met her. She had some lemons, and I was passing through, and I'm not one to take something that's not mine. So I knocked on the door and asked her, excuse me, but can I have a couple of lemons? And she said, sure. So she showed me where it was. I had to go to the back. I went to the back, got the lemons, Jeff, and then I went on my way. I said thank you, went on my way.
Did she invite you in for cookies?
Not yet. A couple of weeks went by, and I needed some more lemonade. So I went back over there. Hi.
Hi, Tim.
Now mind you, I saw the cottage, but I didn't say anything. The second time I did. And I said, is that what I think it is? And she said, yes. So are you renting that? And she said, yes. So in my mind, I thought it was already being rented. And she said, would you like to look at it? I stepped one foot inside. I said, I'll take it. I'll take it. And the funny thing about this really quick is, I started talking to some of the officers. I'm a site supervisor. I work for West Contra Costa School District. I've been here like maybe 9 years, so it's been amazing. And all the cops in Pinole knew who I was before. They knew where I lived. I couldn't even introduce myself. How you? Oh, you're Tim. You live on Quinan Street. They all knew her. But I got up here to say that she's an amazing woman. And through her, the professional cameraman you see back there, Dan, and Ricky, his wife, across, I met them. They're just so amazing. And then I meet you all. You all are amazing. And I'm just honored, very humble, honored to just, hey, John, how you doing? Another. I'm just so happy to be a part of this historical event. Thank you all. I feel so welcome here. There's so much love and so much in this room about you and for you that I can feel it. Thank you. And I call her Mom, so. Thank you all.
Dan, the cameraman, was my first tenant in the cottage, and he helped me design it, and it turned out beautiful. Anyway, okay, enough about me. What about you? Anybody else? Yes, Terry.
Were all the houses in Pinole, because there's a number of houses that look like that. I lived in one when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
But were they all built by the same?
I believe so. Susie probably could tell us more than anybody.
No, I can't tell you a thing.
Okay. probably, if they have the same house plan,
Yeah, the plan.
I'm
is the
sure,
same,
you
yeah,
know,
but I
the
remember-
fireplace,
And it had
the
the same
5-inch
bathroom
mold,
with the-
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got beautiful molding around every door and window.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. But again, Sherwin-Williams and Cover the Earth, there's probably 15 coats of paint on those, and I'd love to get it down to the redwood that it is underneath, but no, it's just not gonna
Yeah,
happen.
because the one
I
I
like
lived
my
in
nails.
is also blue now.
I'm sorry?
The one I lived in is blue too.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
You mentioned that we're open to visitors.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you have your calendar out?
Yeah. I'll catch you after the show.
And your own cooking.
Did you have a question?
I did, but I forgot what it was.
It's okay.
Well, we'll probably
Oh, I
be
know
here.
what it
Oh,
is.
yes.
The painting.
Oh, yes.
I learned on Antiques Roadshow, you go to a restorer and they can advise you on what
Oh,
needs
okay.
to be done.
Great. I will have to Google it.
Oh.
Well, there's a Pinot Artiche,
Right.
and there's a guy
Artisans.
in that group that restores it.
Oh, okay. I'll give them a
Well,
call.
local.
Great, thank you so
Wow.
much. Yeah, because it's starting to peel and I didn't
I don't know
notice
if he
it.
can do that much, but he paints pictures,
might
he's
know.
prepared ceramic things.
Oh, great. Okay.
For